Welcome to today's podcast. We're diving into a critical topic for construction workers, confined space hazards. Did you know that confined spaces are one of the riskiest areas on a job site?
Absolutely. They might seem harmless at first glance, but the dangers inside can be life-threatening. Let's start with what defines a confined space. It's essentially an area that's large enough for someone to enter, but has limited entry or exit points, and isn't designed for continuous occupancy.
Right? Like tanks, silos, or even certain crawl spaces. What makes them hazardous is that these spaces often have poor ventilation, which can lead to oxygen deficiency or toxic gas buildup.
And let's not forget physical hazards, like the risk of entrapment or engulfment. Imagine working in a grain silo. One wrong move and you could get buried.
That's a terrifying thought. Speaking of risks, did you know that OSHA requires employers to evaluate confined spaces before workers enter? They're supposed to identify potential hazards and implement controls.
Exactly. And if the space is classified as a permit-required confined space, workers can't just walk in. They need proper training, permits, and monitoring.
Training is huge. Workers need to know how to use equipment like gas detectors and harnesses. But here's a question. What about emergencies? If something goes wrong, who's responsible for rescue operations?
Great question. OSHA mandates that employers have a rescue plan in place. This could mean having an on-site rescue team or relying on local emergency services, but the team must be trained for confined space rescues.
It's a lot of preparation, but it's necessary. One study found that more than half of confined space fatalities are would-be rescuers who weren't prepared for the hazards.
That's such an important point. Rescue teams need to assess the situation first, not rush in blindly. And this brings us to the role of communication. Workers should always be in constant contact with a standby person stationed outside the space.
Definitely. The standby person acts as the lifeline, monitoring conditions and raising the alarm if needed. But here's the thing. None of this works without the right mindset. Safety isn't just a checklist. It has to be a culture.
Couldn't agree more. Everyone on the team needs to take responsibility, from managers to workers. And honestly, a little humor can help lighten the mood during training sessions. After all, safety doesn't have to be boring, right?
True, but when it comes to confined spaces, the stakes are high. A single oversight can lead to catastrophic consequences. That's why we're having this conversation, to raise awareness and encourage proactive safety measures.
Well said. Before we wrap up, let's remind our listeners, if you're working in or around confined spaces, always follow procedures, use the right equipment, and never take shortcuts.
Absolutely. Stay safe out there, everyone. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Take care.